The rain fell as if the heavens themselves were trying to wash away the sins of the earth. It came in long, unbroken sheets, streaking across the plains and hammering down on the tin roof of Ethan Hale's lean-to. The sound was steady, like 1,000 nails being driven into the sky, and for a rancher who'd lived his whole life on the land, it was oddly comforting. Rain meant water for the cattle, life for the grass, hope for another season. Ethan stood under the edge of the roof, a tin cup clutched loosely in one calloused hand, steam rising from the black coffee inside it. He sipped slowly, eyes scanning the horizon where the prairie bled into storm-dark clouds. The Hale Ranch had been in his family for 3 generations, and though times had grown harsher, Ethan carried it like a badge and a burden both. He was a man of broad shoulders and lean patience, his face carved into a landscape of lines from sun, wind, and more losses than he cared to count. The rain kept his thoughts quiet until a sound broke the rhythm, a voice, low and sharp, slicing through the night. It was not a shout, not even spoken loud enough for the storm to carry far. Yet it hit him with more force than thunder. "I swear, I'll kill you if I have to." The words drifted from the porch, raw and ragged, and they didn't sound like they belonged to any woman Ethan had ever known. He turned, mug halfway to his lips, and froze. Mara Whitlock stood there, half shadowed by the lantern's glow. She was a slip of a woman, no taller than his shoulder, but something in her presence seemed larger tonight. Her hair clung damp against her cheeks, her dress darkened by rain that had soaked her on the walk from the barn. In her hands she clutched a packet of papers, edges curling where the water had touched them. But it was not the papers, nor the soaked dress, nor even the storm that made Ethan's chest tighten. It was her face. Her eyes burned with a fury that was terrifying in its quiet. Her lips, pale from cold and grief, trembled not with weakness but with resolve. She had spoken those words not as a threat tossed in anger, but as a vow pulled from the marrow of her bones. Ethan's first thought was that he'd misheard her. The rain-distorted sound, maybe it had twisted her voice into something darker. But the look on her face told him otherwise. She had meant it. Every syllable had been carved in stone before leaving her lips. The ranch hands who lingered nearby fell silent. One of them, a boy no older than 17, let the hay bale in his arms slip to the ground with a dull thud. Even the cattle in the corral shifted uneasily, as if the weight of her words pressed on them too. The dog, a faithful shepherd that feared little, tucked its tail and crept under the porch. Ethan's heart hammered. He had seen men swear vengeance before, in saloons and on dusty streets where whiskey gave courage to cowards. But this was no drunken oath. This was something else, something colder, sharper, more dangerous. Mara noticed his stare then, and their eyes locked. For a moment, the storm vanished, the rain muted, the night itself bent around the silence between them. Her fury flickered, replaced by something softer, something more painful, the hollow ache of a mother who had already buried hope once and could not do it again. "They took him," she whispered, her voice hoarse now, breaking at the edges. "They took my boy." The words hit Ethan like a branding iron. His hand tightened around the mug, so hard the handle bent. He knew at once she wasn't speaking in riddles. There was no metaphor, no exaggeration. Her son had been taken. Ethan didn't know much about Mara Whitlock. She had arrived at his ranch 3 days ago with little more than a suitcase, those papers she carried everywhere, and a silence heavy as lead. Folks in town had whispered about her, a widow from the east, some said, others claimed she'd quarreled with family and run. Ethan hadn't asked questions. She'd offered to help mend fences and patch roofs in exchange for board, and that was enough. She was a woman who wanted work, not pity. But now, standing there with her eyes wet and her voice trembling, she was not just a guest, not just another soul blown west by bad luck. She was a storm of her own, holding a truth she could no longer keep buried. Ethan stepped closer, his boots sinking into the mud. "Who took him?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. Her grip on the papers tightened. She swallowed hard, her gaze drifting toward the fields as though she feared the night itself might be listening. "Men who answer to Samuel Briggs." The name was a stone dropped in a pond. Ethan knew it well. Briggs was a landowner who controlled half the county through crooked deals and bribes that kept the sheriff in his pocket. He was a man with power, the kind no honest rancher wanted to cross. Ethan had argued with him before over water rights and grazing borders, but those were disputes settled with lawyers and grudging handshakes, not violence. Kidnapping. That was something else entirely. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but Mara cut him off. "I went to the sheriff. I begged. I showed them everything, these papers, the proof of his dealings, the names of his men. They laughed at me." Ethan laughed. "Said I should stop chasing ghosts and accept that sometimes boys run away. But my boy didn't run. They took him, and the law turned its face away. Her voice rose now, no longer a whisper but a cry dragged raw from her throat. Lightning split the sky, and in its brief flare Ethan saw her fully, the trembling hands, the dark circles under her eyes, the desperation twisting her mouth. She looked like a woman who had been pushed past the edge of reason. The papers slipped from her grip, scattering across the porch. Receipts, ledgers, names scribbled in hurried ink, all evidence of corruption that would mean nothing to men already bought. Mara didn't stoop to gather them. She just stared at Ethan, chest rising and falling fast, rain sliding down her temples like tears. You don't understand, she said, softer now, almost pleading. I've tried everything. I went to the law. I begged decent men to help. I prayed. And none of it brought him back. So I'll do it myself. If it means blood, then blood it will be. I don't want it, but I won't stop. I can't. Ethan's breath caught. He was not a man easily shaken, but standing in front of her now, he felt the ground shift beneath him. She was not bluffing. He saw it in her eyes, the steely clarity of a woman who had already decided to cross a line. The storm raged on, drumming against the earth, but the true storm was the one building inside Mara Whitlock. Ethan realized then that her whisper had not been a moment of madness. It was a vow, a promise born of grief and sharpened into steel. And as the rancher met her gaze, he understood something chilling. If she had to, she would keep that promise. The rain did not let up that night. It drove against the windows, filled the troughs, and turned the road into a river of mud. Inside the ranch house, lanterns glowed weakly, their light flickering across rough-hewn beams and the scarred wooden table where Ethan and Mara sat. The scattered papers lay between them, some smeared with water, others curling at the corners. Mara's hands moved restlessly, smoothing and straightening them, as though order on the table could summon order in her heart. Ethan watched her in silence. He had heard confessions before, men broken by drought, wives begging for a few more weeks to pay debts, but nothing like this. Mara had not asked for pity, nor even for help. She had declared her intent, plain as the iron in her voice. And though Ethan wanted to tell her to wait, to breathe, to think, he could see there was no turning her back. Finally, he spoke. You'll need more than anger to bring him home. Mara's eyes lifted, sharp as glass. Anger is all I have left. Ethan leaned forward, his arms folded on the table. No, you've got your boy. He's alive, and that means you've still got reason. Anger will get you killed before you reach Briggs's gate. If you want him back, you'll need to be smarter than them. Her expression flickered, the first crack in her armor. Smarter. They own the law, Ethan. They own the town. Briggs has half a dozen men guarding his place, and the sheriff himself calls on him for supper. How do you fight that with smarts? Ethan took a slow sip of coffee, though the taste had gone bitter. Not by walking in with a gun and a prayer. He set the mug down and met her gaze. But with patience, with planning, and with someone at your side who knows what kind of men you're up against. Mara studied him. For the first time since her vow, she hesitated. Why would you help me? This isn't your fight. The question cut deep. Ethan thought of his own daughter, asleep upstairs, her hair fanned across the pillow like spun gold. He thought of how helpless he would feel if someone took her, if the law mocked his pleas, if the town shrugged. He thought, too, of Briggs, the smug tilt of his hat, the way he signed contracts as though he were blessing lesser men. Ethan had tolerated him for years, because fighting Briggs meant risking ruin. But now, looking at Mara, ruin seemed a small price compared to silence. Because if I don't, Ethan said slowly, then I'm no better than the law that turned you away. And because I've got a daughter of my own. I'd want someone to stand beside me, even if the whole county said no. Mara's breath caught. She lowered her eyes, gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she nodded once, a sharp gesture that carried more gratitude than words could. Ethan straightened. Tell me everything you know. Every detail. Where they took him, when, who you saw. So she did. She spoke of the night her boy, Thomas, had vanished. How he had been walking home from the mill with a friend when a wagon rolled up, how men with scarves over their faces had dragged him inside. The friend had run, but fear kept him from speaking until Mara pressed him. The wagon bore the Briggs brand, and the driver was a man known to work his fields. Mara had chased the trail, confronted the sheriff, even dared Briggs himself. But every door had slammed in her face, until she realized the whole town was complicit in its silence. Ethan listened, his jaw tightening with every word. He knew Briggs employed hard men, the kind who'd do anything for a wage and a bottle. He also knew that Briggs's estate, a sprawling manor of stone and timber, was less a home than a fortress. Getting in would be near impossible. Getting out with a boy alive, even harder. But impossible wasn't the same as hopeless. When she finished, Ethan rose and pulled a map from a drawer. He spread it on the table, pointing to Briggs's land, to the creek that cut through the south pasture, to the line of cottonwoods that offered cover. He spoke of guard rotations he'd noticed in the past, of weak spots in the fence, of the storage sheds where cattle feed was kept. Mara leaned in, her fear hardening into focus. Hours passed. The rain slowed. Together, they sketched a plan, a desperate, fragile thing that leaned on luck and nerve as much as strategy. They would move at night, through the creek bed where sound and scent would be hidden. Ethan knew a ranch hand loyal to him who could provide horses. Mara would distract Briggs's men at the front gate with the evidence she carried, while Ethan slipped in from the rear to find the boy. It was reckless. It was dangerous. But it was better than waiting for nothing. When the lantern burned low, Ethan looked at Mara again. She was exhausted, her face pale, but her eyes shone with something fierce, not just fury now, but determination forged into steel. You understand, he said quietly, once we start this, there's no turning back. If Briggs catches us, there'll be no mercy. Mara met his gaze without flinching. There's no mercy now. At least this way, I'll know I tried. Ethan nodded. He rose, walked to the window, and stared out at the darkened fields. The storm had passed, leaving the world heavy with silence. Somewhere out there, Briggs slept in his fine house, secure in the belief that no one would dare challenge him. And somewhere within those walls, a boy lay waiting, afraid, perhaps, but still alive. Ethan's hand tightened on the window frame. He felt the weight of what was to come pressing down on him. Blood might be spilled, lives might be lost. But in the quiet of that night, he also felt something else stirring, the old, stubborn sense of justice that no drought, no debt, no tyrant could ever kill. Behind him, Mara whispered, "Thank you." It was barely audible, almost lost to the wind, but Ethan heard it. And he knew it wasn't gratitude alone. It was trust, the kind of trust that could bind two people together in the face of impossible odds. The rancher turned back, his face set. "Get some rest, Mara. Tomorrow night, we ride." She nodded, gathering the scattered papers with careful hands. Her vow still lingered in the air, the whisper that had stunned him hours earlier, but now it no longer sounded like a solitary promise. It sounded like a bond, shared between them. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Ethan doused the lantern and sat alone in the dark. The storm outside had passed, but the storm ahead was only beginning. He thought of the words she had spoken, "I swear, I'll kill you if I have to." Now, Ethan understood. Sometimes, vengeance was not a choice but a chain. Sometimes, justice demanded that a person walk into the dark with nothing but a vow and a partner willing to risk everything. And sometimes, a whisper in the rain could ignite a war that would change everything. Tomorrow, the fight would begin. And Ethan Hale, rancher, father, and man of the land, would be ready.